The descending shadow, the final hour. The void of space around Helix Prime burned with the light of dying ships. Defense Commander Theron of the Andrali Federation stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crystal Horizon, watching his fleet crumble before his eyes. His silver skin reflected the red emergency lights that bathed the command center, and his forearms worked frantically across multiple control panels. The battle had raged for 8 hours, and every minute brought them closer to total annihilation. Helix Prime was a mining colony, home to 3 million Andrali civilians who worked the rich mineral deposits in the asteroid belt. It was a peaceful place filled with families and workers who had never known war. The Andrali Federation itself had not fought a major conflict in over 2 centuries. They were diplomats, artists, and scientists. They were not warriors. But the Velcros Empire did not care about peace or diplomacy. They cared only about conquest and resources. The Velcros had appeared in the system 6 days ago with a fleet of over 400 warships. Their ultimatum was simple: surrender the colony and all its resources or be destroyed. The Andrali Council had refused, believing their defense fleet and orbital weapons platforms could hold until reinforcements arrived from the core worlds. They had been wrong, terribly, fatally wrong. The Velcros' onslaught Theron's tactical display showed the grim reality. Of his original 70 defense ships, only 19 remained operational. The elegant Andrali cruisers, with their crystalline hulls that could bend light and energy, were being shattered like glass under the relentless Velcros assault. The enemy ships were massive, brutal things, all sharp angles and dark metal, built like flying fortresses with guns bristling from every surface. But it was not just the numbers that were killing them. The Velcros had brought something new to this battle, something the Andrali had never encountered before. They called it the Silencer. It was a weapon that emitted a field of energy that disrupted all electronic systems within its range. When a Velcros dreadnought activated the Silencer, nearby Andrali ships simply went dark. Their weapons stopped firing, their shields collapsed, their engines died. They became floating coffins, helpless as Velcros fighters swarmed them and tore them apart. Theron had watched 17 ships die that way. 17 crews, over 6,000 Andrali, went silent and then disappeared in balls of fire. The screams over the communication channels before the end still echoed in his mind. He had ordered the remaining ships to maintain maximum distance from the Velcros dreadnoughts, but that meant they could not bring their weapons to bear effectively. It was a losing situation no matter what he did. A desperate decision. His second-in-command, Officer Lissa, turned to him with fear evident in her large, dark eyes. Her voice was steady despite the terror Theron knew she felt. "Commander, the Velcros are preparing another wave. 60 ships advancing on our position. If they deploy the Silencer again, we will lose half our remaining fleet." Theron's mind raced through every tactical scenario he had studied at the military academy. Nothing fit. The Andrali way of war was based on precision, on elegant solutions to complex problems. But there was nothing elegant about being overwhelmed by superior numbers and technology. This was raw, brutal warfare, and his people were not equipped for it. The bridge shook as another impact struck their shields. Theron could see the energy barrier flickering, weakening with each hit. They had maybe 10 minutes before shield failure. After that, the Crystal Horizon would be defenseless. He thought of his family on Andrali Prime, his mate Sarah and their 3 children. He had promised them he would return. He had lied, though he had not known it at the time. "All ships fall back to defensive formation around the colony," Theron ordered. "Focus all fire on their lead vessels. We need to buy time for the civilians to evacuate." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was hopeless. The evacuation transports were slow and vulnerable. The Velcros would destroy them as easily as they had destroyed his warships. 3 million people would die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The reinforcements from the core worlds were still 3 days away. They might as well be on the other side of the galaxy. Breaking protocol, Theron made a decision that would either save his people or earn him a court-martial. He turned to his communications officer, a young Andrali named Court who had graduated from the academy only 6 months ago. "Open a secure channel. I need to send a message on the human frequencies." Every head on the bridge turned to look at him. Lissa's eyes widened in shock. "Commander, the Treaty of Non-Intervention specifically forbids involving the humans in Federation military matters. The Council will have no one left to punish if we all die here," Theron interrupted, his voice harder than he intended. Open the channel, Court, that is an order. The young officer hesitated only a moment before his fingers flew across his console. Channel open, Commander. Broadcasting on all human colonial frequencies. Theron took a breath and began to speak. This is Defense Commander Theron of the Andrali Federation to any human vessels in range. We are under attack at Helix Prime by the Velcros Empire. Our fleet is destroyed. 3 million civilians are about to be slaughtered. I know the treaty forbids me from asking this, but I am begging you. If there is anyone out there who can help us, please. We are dying here. He cut the transmission and waited. Silence filled the bridge. Everyone knew about the humans, of course. They had arrived in this sector of the galaxy 25 years ago, a species from a distant arm of the spiral. They had come in their slow generation ships, asking only for permission to settle a few uninhabited systems and to observe galactic civilization from a distance. The Galactic Council had granted their request, but with strict conditions. Humans were to remain neutral in all political and military affairs. They were to be peaceful observers, nothing more. The Council had studied human history and found it disturbing. Humans had spent thousands of years fighting brutal wars among themselves. Their own planet still bore the scars of nuclear weapons and biological warfare. The Council decided that humanity needed time to evolve beyond its violent nature before being fully integrated into galactic society. The mysterious response. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. The Velcros fleet continued its advance, and Theron's remaining ships fired desperately at the approaching wall of enemy vessels. It was like throwing pebbles at a mountain. Another Andrali cruiser exploded on the tactical display, and Theron felt each death like a physical blow. Then Court sat up straight, his hands trembling over his console. Commander, I am receiving a response. Audio only. The signal is coming from inside the asteroid belt. I did not detect any ships there. Play it, Theron ordered. A voice came through the speakers, speaking in the human language that the ship's computer automatically translated. The voice was male, deep and calm, with an accent Theron could not place. Defense Commander Theron, this is Captain James Ryder of the human vessel Warhammer. We have been monitoring the situation. Hold your position. Help is on the way. Before Theron could respond, the transmission cut off. He stared at the communications console, confusion mixing with desperate hope. Court, where exactly did that signal come from? The young officer worked his instruments, then looked up with an expression of disbelief. The signal originated from inside the largest asteroid in the belt, approximately 200 kilometers from the colony. But Commander, our sensors show nothing there. No ships, no energy signatures, nothing. Lissa moved to the tactical station and ran her own scans. He is right, Commander. Whatever transmitted that message is completely invisible to our sensors. How is that possible? Theron had no answer. He pulled up the records on human settlements in this system. There was one listed, a small research outpost on one of Helix Prime's moons, staffed by 20 human scientists studying the colony's unique ecosystem. They had no ships registered, no military presence. Just a handful of researchers living in prefabricated habitats. So where had this Captain Ryder come from, and what was the Warhammer? The arrival of the Velcros fleet was now within weapons range of the colony itself. Theron could see on the display as their massive ships took up positions to bombard the surface. The civilian evacuation was barely 30% complete. Over 2 million people were still on the colony, huddled in shelters that would offer no protection against the firepower about to rain down on them. All ships, interpose yourselves between the Velcros fleet and the colony, Theron ordered. We will shield the civilians with our own hulls if we must. His 19 remaining ships moved into position, placing themselves directly in the path of the Velcros advance. It was a suicide mission and everyone knew it, but it was all they had left. Theron watched the enemy ships grow larger on the display, watched their weapons charging for the final devastating salvo. He closed his eyes and thought of Sarah one last time. Then every alarm on the bridge began screaming at once. Court shouted over the noise. Commander! Massive energy signature! Something is emerging from the asteroid belt. Theron's eyes snapped open and he stared at the tactical display. A contact had appeared, moving at a speed that should have been impossible. It was coming from the direction of the largest asteroid, accelerating toward the battlefield faster than any ship he had ever seen. The energy readings were off the scale, so powerful that his instruments were struggling to measure them accurately. Visual on main screen, he ordered. The display switched from tactical to visual, and Theron felt his breath catch in his throat. A ship was descending into the combat zone, and it was like nothing he had ever seen. It was enormous, easily 3 times the size of the largest Velcros dreadnought, with a hull that seemed to be made of dark gray metal that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The ship's design was brutal and efficient, all hard angles and armored plates with no wasted space or decorative elements. But what struck Theron most were the weapons. The ship bristled with them. Massive gun turrets lined its hull, each one larger than an entire Andrali fighter. Missile pods covered its flanks in rows upon rows of deadly potential. Energy projectors glowed with barely contained power. This was not an exploration vessel or a research ship. This was a warship built for one purpose and one purpose alone: destruction. A new power revealed. The human ship, the Warhammer, descended into the battlefield with the confidence of a predator entering its territory. It moved between the Andrali defensive line and the Velcros fleet, positioning itself as a shield between the two forces. Then it simply stopped, hanging in space as if daring the Velcros to make the first move. A transmission came through on all frequencies. It was the same voice Theron had heard before, Captain James Ryder, but now there was steel in his tone. "Velcros vessels, this is Captain Ryder of the human warship Warhammer. You are hereby ordered to cease hostilities immediately and withdraw from this system. This is your only warning." Theron could not believe what he was hearing. A single human ship, no matter how large or well-armed, was challenging a fleet of 400 Velcros warships. It was insane. It was suicide. And yet something about the captain's voice made him believe that James Ryder was not bluffing. The Velcros response came quickly, broadcast on the same frequency. The voice was harsh and guttural, speaking through a translator that struggled with the Velcros language. "Human vessel, you're in violation of the Treaty of Non-Intervention. Your presence in this conflict is illegal. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed along with the Andrali." Captain Ryder's response was calm, almost amused. "The treaty says we cannot initiate involvement in galactic conflicts. It says nothing about responding to distress calls from allies in need. Consider the treaty's fine print read and exploited. Now I will repeat my order one last time. Withdraw from this system or I will remove you." There was a moment of silence, and then the Velcros fleet opened fire. Over 200 ships launched their weapons simultaneously. The space between the Velcros fleet and the Warhammer lit up with thousands of missiles, energy beams, and kinetic projectiles. It was enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The barrage streaked toward the human ship, a wall of death that nothing could survive. Theron watched in horror, certain he was about to witness the destruction of the only hope his people had. But as the weapons reached the Warhammer, something incredible happened. A shield materialized around the human ship, a barrier of energy that glowed brilliant blue. The Velcro's weapons struck the shield and simply stopped. Missiles exploded harmlessly against it. Energy beams diffused and scattered. Kinetic rounds bounced off as if they had hit solid steel. The barrage continued for 10 full seconds, the combined might of hundreds of warships pouring everything they had into that single target. And when it was over, when the space between the fleets finally cleared, the Warhammer hung there completely undamaged. Its shields had not even flickered. "The counter-strike begins," Captain Ryder's voice came through the speakers again, and now there was no amusement in it, only cold determination. "You have made your choice. May whatever gods you believe in have mercy on you, because I will not." The Warhammer opened fire, and Theron understood in that moment why humanity had been kept isolated from galactic affairs. This was not warfare as the Andrali knew it. This was not even warfare as the brutal Velcros practiced it. This was something else entirely, something that made Theron's blood run cold even as hope kindled in his chest. The human weapons tore through the Velcros fleet like a blade through silk. Missiles streaked from the Warhammer's launch tubes, not by the dozens or even the hundreds, but by the thousands. They moved with impossible precision, each one tracking a separate target, evading defensive fire with maneuvers that defied physics. When they struck, they did not simply explode. They punched through shields and armor and detonated inside the enemy ships, ripping them apart from within. The energy weapons were even more devastating. Beams of pure white light lanced out from the Warhammer's turrets, and wherever they touched a Velcro ship, that ship simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, Just a flash of light and then empty space where a warship had been a moment before. It was as if the human weapons were erasing the enemy from reality itself. The Velcro's fleet tried to respond, tried to concentrate their fire, tried to use the silencer. But the Warhammer was already moving, its engines propelling it through the battlefield at speeds that made it a blur on Theron's sensors. The human ship danced between enemy vessels, its weapons never stopping, never missing. Every shot found a target. Every missile claimed a kill. In less than 3 minutes, 50 Velcro ships were destroyed or crippled. The rest began to fall back, their formation breaking as panic spread through their ranks. They had come here expecting to face peaceful miners and inadequate defense forces. Instead, they had found a nightmare made real, a single ship that fought like an entire fleet and could not be stopped. Theron watched the slaughter with a mixture of awe and terror. This was humanity's true nature revealed at last. They had not been peaceful observers building a civilization in the shadows. They had been wolves hiding among sheep, waiting for the moment when they would need to show their teeth. And now that moment had come, and the galaxy would never be the same. The thunder of victory, the hammer falls. The Velcro's fleet was in full retreat, but Captain James Ryder had no intention of letting them escape. The Warhammer surged forward, cutting through the panicked enemy formation like a shark through a school of fish. On the bridge of the Crystal Horizon, Defense Commander Theron watched in stunned silence as the human warship demonstrated capabilities that defied everything he understood about space combat. The Warhammer was not just fast. It moved with an agility that should have been impossible for a ship of its size. It rolled, spun, and accelerated in ways that would have torn apart any Andrali or Velcros vessel. The gravitational forces alone should have crushed everyone aboard, but the human ship seemed immune to such limitations. Theron realized with growing amazement that humanity had not just advanced their weapons technology, they had revolutionized every aspect of warfare. Officer Lissa stood at her station, her forearms gripping the console for support, as another shock wave from a distant explosion rocked the Crystal Horizon. "Commander, I am reading energy signatures from the Warhammer that do not match any known propulsion or weapon system in our database. Whatever technology the humans have developed, it is centuries beyond our own." Theron nodded slowly, unable to take his eyes from the display. The human ship had just destroyed 3 Velcros cruisers in a single pass, its weapons firing in perfect synchronization. "Update our records. Humanity is no longer classified as a developing civilization. They are a major power, possibly the major power in this sector." The Admiral's fury aboard the Velcro's flagship, the Eternal Conqueror. Admiral Kretch smashed his massive fist against the command throne. The impact dented the metal and sent his tactical officers scrambling backward in fear. Kretch was a towering figure even for a Velcros, standing nearly 3 meters tall with thick armored hide and razor-sharp bone ridges protruding from his shoulders and skull. He had commanded fleets in 40 conquest campaigns and never once tasted defeat. That record was about to be broken by a single enemy ship. "Status report," he roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous bridge. His second-in-command, Commander Vex, approached cautiously, knowing that bearers of bad news often did not survive Kretch's rage. "Admiral, we have lost 73 ships in the last 5 minutes. The human vessel is targeting our heavy cruisers and dreadnoughts specifically, eliminating our most powerful assets. Our fighters cannot get close enough to engage. Our capital ships cannot track its movements fast enough to return effective fire. And our shields." Vex hesitated, then continued. "Our shields are useless against their weapons. They pass through our defensive barriers as if they were not even there." Kretch's eyes, small and red in his massive skull, narrowed dangerously. "Activate the silencer. Full power. That will disable their systems and leave them vulnerable." Unconventional warfare Captain James Ryder sat in the command chair of the Warhammer's bridge, his fingers moving across the holographic controls with practiced ease. Around him, his crew worked with the efficiency that came from years of training and dozens of combat simulations. They had prepared for this moment, trained for the day when humanity would need to reveal itself to the galaxy. That day had come sooner than expected, but they were ready. "Tactical, target the enemy flagship," Ryder ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos of battle surrounding them. "Let us introduce Admiral Kretch to human ingenuity." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, his tactical officer, grinned from her station. "Aye, Captain." marking the Eternal Conqueror as priority target. "Shall I use the standard missile spread or something more creative?" "Creative," Ryder replied. "Show them what happens when you challenge a species that spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other before we ever left our home world." Chen's fingers danced across her console, programming a firing solution that would have seemed insane to any other species. The Warhammer's missile tubes opened and a swarm of projectiles launched into space, but these were not standard missiles. Each one carried an artificial intelligence that could think, adapt, and learn. They moved in coordinated patterns, communicating with each other, forming strategies on the fly. The Velcro's point defense systems tried to intercept them, but the missiles split apart, each one becoming 3 smaller warheads that zigzagged through the defensive fire. They approached the Eternal Conqueror from 17 different angles simultaneously, making it impossible to defend against all of them. When they struck, they did not target the hull or shields. They targeted the ship's weapon systems specifically, crippling the flagship's ability to fight back without destroying it entirely. Admiral Kretch felt his ship shudder as explosion after explosion rippled across its surface. Alarms screamed throughout the bridge and damage reports flooded in from every section. Within 30 seconds, the Eternal Conqueror had lost 80% of its offensive capabilities. The pride of the Velcro's fleet had been reduced to a floating target. The human doctrine Theron watched as the Warhammer continued its assault, and slowly, he began to understand the human approach to warfare. The Andrali fought with precision and elegance, seeking to disable enemy ships while minimizing casualties. The Velcros fought with overwhelming force, using numbers and brutality to crush their opponents. But humans fought with something else entirely: ruthless efficiency combined with tactical brilliance. Every move the Warhammer made served multiple purposes. When it destroyed a Velcros cruiser, it did so in a way that sent debris scattering into the path of other enemy ships, forcing them to break formation. When it launched missiles, some were decoys designed to draw fire away from the real warheads. When it maneuvered, it used the gravity wells of nearby asteroids to slingshot itself into unexpected positions, appearing where the enemy least expected. The humans fought like they had been doing this for millennia, which Theron realized with a chill they had been. While the Andrali had spent 2 centuries in peace and the Velcros had conquered primitive worlds with little resistance, humanity had been locked in an endless cycle of warfare on their home planet. They had refined combat into a science, an art form, a religion. Every tactic in the human playbook had been written in the blood of their own species. Lyssa turned to Theron, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "Commander, I have been analyzing the Warhammer's combat patterns. They are using tactics that appear in our historical databases from civilizations that destroyed themselves through warfare. The humans have studied every conflict in galactic history and learned from them all. They know how we fight because they know how everyone fights." Theron felt a weight settle on his chest. The galaxy had tried to keep humanity isolated, to give them time to move beyond their violent nature. But humanity had not moved beyond it. They had perfected it, and now they were unleashing centuries of accumulated military knowledge on an enemy that had grown complacent through easy victories. The turning point, the battle had been raging for 15 minutes since the Warhammer entered the fight, and the Velcros fleet was in complete disarray. Over 150 ships had been destroyed or disabled. The remainder were scattered across the system, some trying to flee, others attempting to regroup, and a few still stubbornly trying to fight back. None of it mattered. The human ship moved through them like death itself, unstoppable and inevitable. Admiral Kretch stood on his crippled flagship watching his fleet die. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death, which was a constant companion in warfare, but fear of the unknown. Fear of facing an enemy he could not understand, could not predict, could not defeat. A transmission came through on the command frequency. It was Captain Ryder's voice speaking directly to Kretch. "Admiral, you have 2 choices. You can continue this fight and I will destroy every ship in your fleet. Or you can order a full retreat and live to tell your empire what happened here today. Choose now." Kretch's pride screamed at him to fight, to die with honor rather than accept defeat. But his tactical mind, the part of him that had survived 4 decades of warfare, understood the truth. This was not a battle he could win. The human captain was offering him a chance to save what remained of his fleet, and more importantly, to warn the Empire about this new threat. He turned to Commander Vex, his voice heavy with bitterness. "Order all ships to retreat. Full speed to the jump point. We are leaving this cursed system." The command went out across the Velcros fleet and the remaining ships began their withdrawal. They moved as quickly as their damaged engines would allow, burning hard for the system's edge where they could activate their hyperspace drives and escape. The Warhammer followed but did not pursue aggressively. It had made its point. Aftermath of thunder as the last Velcro ship vanished into hyperspace. Silence fell across the battlefield. The space around Helix Prime was littered with debris, the shattered remains of hundreds of ships. Emergency beacons flickered throughout the wreckage, marking survival pods and damaged vessels that might still have living crew aboard. The battle was over, and against all odds the Andrali had survived. Theron stood on the bridge of the crystal horizon, trying to process what had just happened. His fleet had been defeated, his people had been hours from extinction, and then a single human warship had appeared and changed everything. He felt gratitude certainly, but also a deep unease. Humanity had just demonstrated military power that exceeded the combined might of the Galactic Council's fleets. What did that mean for the future? What did it mean for the careful balance of power that had kept the galaxy relatively peaceful for centuries? A transmission request came through from the Warhammer. Theron accepted it immediately, and Captain James Ryder's face appeared on the main display. The human was younger than Theron had expected, perhaps 40 cycles old by Andrali reckoning, with short dark hair and eyes that held the weariness of someone who had seen too much combat. He wore a uniform of dark blue with insignia that Theron did not recognize. "Commander Theron," Ryder said, his expression serious. "My medical teams are standing by to assist with rescue operations. We also have repair drones that can help stabilize your damaged ships. With your permission, I would like to deploy them." Theron felt relief wash through him. "Permission granted, Captain, and thank you. You saved 3 million lives today. I do not have words sufficient to express our gratitude." Ryder nodded, but his expression did not soften. "Commander, we need to talk. Not just you and I, but your government and mine. The galaxy needs to understand some things about humanity, and we need to understand some things about the galaxy. The Treaty of Non-Intervention was based on false assumptions. It is time for honest conversation. A new alliance over the next several hours as rescue operations continued throughout the system. Theron and Ryder spoke at length. The human captain explained what Theron had already begun to suspect. Humanity had not been idly watching galactic civilization from the sidelines. They had been building, preparing, and planning for the day when they would need to step out of the shadows. The research outposts scattered throughout neutral space were not just scientific stations. They were observation posts, military bases disguised as peaceful settlements. The generation ships that had brought humans to this sector were not slow, outdated vessels. They were mobile shipyards and factories, capable of producing warships like the Warhammer. Humanity had been preparing for war while everyone else assumed they were learning to be peaceful. "Why?" Theron asked. "Why hide your true capabilities? Why pretend to be weaker than you are?" Ryder leaned back in his chair, and for a moment he looked even more tired. "Because we learned from our own history, Commander. When humanity finally unified after our last global war, we looked back at everything we had done to each other and we were horrified. We had almost destroyed our entire species through violence and hatred. We vowed never to let that happen again." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When we reached the stars and found the Galactic Council, we saw a civilization that had achieved peace through diplomacy and cooperation. It was everything we hoped to become. So we asked to observe, to learn from you. The Council agreed, but only under the condition that we remain isolated. They feared our violent nature. And they were right to fear it," Theron said quietly. "Perhaps," Ryder admitted, "but they made a mistake. They assumed that because we had a history of violence, we could not be trusted. They never considered that our history might have taught us something valuable. We learned how to fight, yes, but we also learned when to fight and why. We do not seek conquest or domination. We seek to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Theron thought about his people, about the 3 million civilians who would have died without human intervention. "The Velcros will not forget this defeat. They will report back to their empire, and the empire will respond. You have made powerful enemies today, Captain." Ryder smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Let them come. Humanity has fought enemies before. We survived ice ages and plagues, world wars, and nuclear fire. We crawled out of caves and reached the stars through sheer stubbornness and refusal to give up. If the Velcros Empire wants a war with humanity, they will learn what humans do best. And what is that? Theron asked. We win, Ryder said simply. Galactic repercussions news of the battle at Helix Prime spread through the galaxy at the speed of light communications. The Andrali Federation celebrated their unlikely survival and immediately began negotiations with humanity for a formal alliance. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions to discuss what to do about the humans who had violated the Treaty of Non-Intervention. The Velcros Empire raged and threatened retaliation while secretly reassessing their military strategies. But the most significant change was in how every species now viewed humanity. They were no longer the peaceful newcomers to be patronized and contained. They were a force to be reckoned with, a civilization that had mastered warfare in ways that made even the most militaristic empires nervous. The humans had been watching and learning from the shadows, and now they had stepped into the light. On Helix Prime, the evacuation shelters opened and civilians emerged to find their colony saved, and their skies patrolled by human fighters. Children looked up at the massive shape of the Warhammer in orbit and asked their parents who the humans were. The adults struggled to answer because the truth was that no one really knew. Humanity remained an enigma, powerful and dangerous, protective yet unpredictable. 3 days after the battle, the Andrali Council formally requested that the Galactic Council revoke the Treaty of Non-Intervention and grant humanity full membership status. The motion passed unanimously. No one wanted the humans isolated anymore. It was better to have them as allies than as unknown variables lurking in the darkness. Better to work with them than against them. Captain Ryder stood on the observation deck of the Warhammer, looking out at the stars. His executive officer, Commander Marcus Webb, joined him. The brass is calling this a success, sir. We achieved our objectives, saved the colony, and established humanity as a galactic power. They are already talking about medals and commendations. Ryder nodded but did not smile. We also revealed our hand, Marcus. Every species in the galaxy now knows that humans can fight. Some will seek alliance with us. Others will see us as a threat that needs to be eliminated. We have entered the galactic stage and there is no going back. Do you think we made the right choice? Webb asked. Intervening? Breaking the treaty? Ryder was quiet for a long moment, watching the repair drones work on the damaged Andrali ships. 3 million people are alive because we acted. Children who would have died are going to grow up, fall in love, have families of their own. Yes, we made the right choice. Whatever consequences come from this, we will face them together. He turned away from the viewport and headed back toward the bridge. There was work to be done, reports to file, and preparations to make. The galaxy had changed today, and humanity had changed with it. They were no longer observers hiding in the shadows. They were players in the great game of galactic politics and power. The silent victory a month after the battle, a monument was erected on Helix Prime. It stood in the colony's central plaza, a towering structure of crystal and metal that caught the light of the system's star and scattered it into rainbow patterns. Inscribed on its base in 17 different languages were the names of every Andrali who had died defending the colony. At the top, visible from anywhere in the plaza, was a simple phrase in both Andrali and human languages. They stood against darkness, and humanity answered the call. Defense Commander Theron attended the dedication ceremony along with Captain Ryder and representatives from a dozen galactic civilizations. Speeches were made about courage and sacrifice, about the bonds between species and the hope for peace, but Theron barely heard them. He was thinking about that moment when the Warhammer had descended into the battlefield, when a single ship had changed the course of history. After the ceremony, Theron and Ryder stood together, watching the crowd disperse. Captain, Theron said quietly, may I ask you something personal? Of course, Ryder replied. When you received my distress call, did you hesitate? Did you debate whether to intervene, knowing it would break the treaty and expose humanity's secrets? Ryder looked at him with those weary eyes that had seen too much war. No, Commander. I did not hesitate. The moment I heard your call, the moment I knew 3 million people were about to die, there was only one choice. We are human. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. It is what we have always done, and it is what we will always do. Theron felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had been carrying since the battle. Then the galaxy is fortunate that humanity chose to be heroes rather than conquerors. Perhaps, Ryder said. But ask me again in 100 years. History has a way of judging us differently than we judge ourselves. They stood in silence for a while longer. Two warriors from different worlds united by the experience of combat and the knowledge that they had changed the galaxy forever. Above them, the stars shone with ancient light, and somewhere among them, the Velcro's empire plotted revenge. But on Helix Prime, 3 million people lived because humanity had descended into the battlefield and emerged victorious. The battlefield had fallen silent, and humanity stood victorious, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple act of answering a call for help. And in that moment, as the galaxy watched and wondered what humanity would do next, Captain James Ryder and his crew prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. They were human after all, and humans always found a way.